Welcome back to Midnight Signal AI. Today is June 14th, 2026, and the biggest AI stories are all about pressure. Pressure on frontier models, pressure from regulators, and pressure from users asking what these systems are really safe to ship.
We've got a pretty clear pattern today. The model race is still moving fast, but so is the pushback from governments, from courts, and even from the company's own rollout decisions. A lot of signal and not much room for sloppy decisions.
Business Insider says OpenAI is now dealing with a coalition of states looking at ChatGPT's impact on young users. That is not just a PR headache. It's a sign that safety questions are moving from internet debate into formal oversight. What stands out is the timing. OpenAI says it's committed to learning, which is the right tone, but not the same thing as a concrete answer. When regulators start asking about minors, mental health, and product behavior, the conversation gets a lot more specific and a lot less forgiving. And for OpenAI, this lands at a sensitive moment. The company is still trying to present itself as the leader in useful, mainstream AI. But the more users treat ChatGPT like a general-purpose companion, the more its social risks come into view. Jamie, this feels like the kind of story that doesn't fade quickly.
Exactly. Once a coalition of states starts moving together, the company is no longer just debating one lawsuit or one report. It's looking at policy momentum. And that can affect product defaults, age controls, moderation, even how OpenAI talks about its own models.
NDTV's version of the story is blunt. Claude Fable 5 was Anthropic's most powerful model, and it ended up disabled only days after launch. That alone would be notable. But the bigger point is that this wasn't just a normal bug fix or a soft rollback. The surrounding reporting says the US government became involved, which turns a product issue into a national security and access control issue very quickly. For Anthropic, that's a tough trade-off. The company has built part of its identity around safety, but safety is only an advantage if the model stays usable. The minute a flagship model goes offline, customers start wondering whether the release was premature. Jamie, this is what frontier model maturity looks like now, not just capability, but how fast you can recover when the world pushes back.
And there's a real commercial cost there. If users or enterprises think a model could vanish right after launch, they get cautious. They may still test it, but they hesitate to build workflows around it.
The Indian Panorama says Anthropic is positioning Fable 5 as the first Mythos-class model that regular users can actually use. That's a big product signal. It suggests Anthropic is trying to separate the research frontier from the product frontier. And honestly, that distinction matters. Frontier lab users don't just want a model that performs well on benchmarks. They want something they can trust to stay available, behave consistently, and not suddenly disappear behind a policy wall. But this is where the story gets tricky. If you market a new class of model as a milestone, then immediately have to constrain access, the narrative gets split between capability and control. That can be smart safety practice, but it's not a clean launch. Jamie, I think the market will read this in two ways at once. Impressive model, messy rollout.
Yeah, and those two things can coexist. The problem is that buyers usually remember the messy rollout longer than the announcement video, especially in enterprise.
XDA's framing is almost the whole frontier AI paradox in one sentence. A model can be smart enough to find bugs other systems miss and still be vulnerable enough to get pulled offline. That's a reminder that intelligence and deployability are not the same thing. In fact, the better the model gets at finding hidden failure modes, the more pressure there is to ask whether anyone has a stable grip on how it can be used. If the government really forced it offline because of a jailbreak method, that suggests the compliance bar is moving. Labs can't just say, "We fixed it internally." They may need to prove that the public release won't be abused in the first place. Jamie, that's a pretty big change for the industry.
It is, and it also means the premium frontier race is no longer only about who ships first. It's about who can keep shipping after the first public stress test.
This one is more focused, but it matters. MarkTechPost says Google's Gemini Sequel 2 setup pushed Gemini 3.1 Pro to 80.04% on the Bird's single model leaderboard. That's not a consumer headline, it's an enterprise one. Text-to-SQL is exactly the kind of capability that can move from nice demo to actual workflow if it holds up in real systems. And the reason it matters is simple. Data teams are expensive, and everyone wants fewer bottlenecks. If a model can reliably turn natural language into usable queries, that changes how fast business users can get answers. But there's always a caveat with benchmark wins. Leaderboards reward a narrow task. Real databases have permissioning, weird schemas, and edge cases, so the score is a signal, not a guarantee. Jamie, still, this is the kind of signal Google wants right now.
Definitely. It gives Google a concrete enterprise story at a time when a lot of model news sounds abstract. Query generation is the sort of thing buyers can understand immediately.
OpenAI's Academy push is less dramatic than the probe story, but it's still important. The company is trying to make AI feel operational, not experimental. That matters because the next phase of AI adoption probably won't be won by raw model quality alone. It'll be won by who helps people actually change how they work. Schools, workflows, and agent habits are part of that. So even if this doesn't grab headlines the way GPT launches do, it's a good reminder that OpenAI is still thinking like a platform company. They want users trained, repeatable, and dependent on the ecosystem. Jamie, that's a very different kind of moat.
It is, and it may be the most durable one. Skills and habits are harder to copy than features, especially when the features are changing every few months.
Before we wrap, there's one more industry-wide backdrop worth mentioning from Wired and other outlets. The legal and operational pressure around AI is tightening at the same time the models get better.
That's the pattern today, really. More capability on one side, more constraints on the other. OpenAI is being watched, Anthropic is being constrained, Google is trying to prove utility, and everyone is discovering that the next phase of AI is as much about governance as it is about generation.
Before we sign off, a quick look at robotics. Rivian's CEO is taking a pretty different path from the Elon-style humanoid race. The emphasis is less on showmanship and more on building something genuinely useful.
Honestly, that may be the sanest way to do it. In robotics, the coolest demo and the most deployable machine are rarely the same thing.
On the hardware side, Jensen Huang says he's not worried about the chip route, and the numbers are backing him up. It's a very classic NVIDIA move. Let the quarter do the talking.
Right, if the business is still humming, the panic tends to get a lot quieter.
And to end on a lighter note, there's a wonderfully odd little human interest piece about librarians, a library, and some extremely specific detective work. It's the kind of story that reminds you the internet still has surprises.
That is exactly the kind of delight we needed at the end. Bookish, bizarre, and very hard to predict.
That's the brief. We'll be back when the machines have more to say.